Welcome to another edition of Wildcat Country. Eric Cohen and Shane Dale. Arizona is still number one. Arizona is still on a 6-game win streak in football. Life is good. And as Shane said last week, just enjoy the ride or something thereabouts.
No,
right?
and enjoy it. The cliche 1 game at a time applies to us fans as well. Enjoy it 1 game at a time because you never know when things might go off the rails, and not expecting it to. But we're enjoying a blowout win over Wisconsin, and still reveling in what the football team's done. I don't know about you, but I've gone back and watched some of the highlights of the last several football games as well, because I enjoy it quite a bit. So it's fun time to be a Wildcat fan. Enjoy it, and also want to mention to you and our listeners, Happy Hanukkah as we continue to celebrate Hanukkah. So hope we are all having a great holiday season and filled with family and friends and some more Wildcat victories coming soon, hopefully.
You know what? This last few months, and we're going to talk to the voice of the Wildcats, Brian Jeffries. Always great to catch up with him, and I'm sure he will have some good stories. Just the run that Arizona has been on, and we talk about this often, but we can't say it enough. When you and I started this podcast again in 2020, there were no games, and we like to say that over and over. And if you're a long-time listener, sorry, we're boring you with that again. But to go on a run when Arizona was winless, blown out 70-7. We've seen the women's basketball team be one shot away from a national championship. We've seen the men's team take us on some interesting journeys, let's say. But now the run that we are on right now, Arizona is the betting favorite right now to win the national championship in college basketball. I know, to Shane's chagrin, but it's true. They're number one for a reason. They have looked dominant. The football team is a 3.5-point favorite over Oklahoma in a bowl game played in Texas. If you had told me that in August, I would have thought you were nuts. Yeah, I think everything about this would have thought you were nuts. It's just been an incredible ride. And
I think that it is okay to look back. Think back to where we were episode 1, because this is episode like 185, give or take. And go back to episode 1, which was Pandemic Central 2020. We didn't know if there's going to be any football that year. Basketball, we thought maybe that there was a chance there were going to be some games. But that cloud was still lingering overhead, the basketball team, possible sanctions. We didn't know what was going to happen next. Sean Miller was still the coach. Kevin Sumlin was still the coach of the football team. And we didn't know that 70-7 was right around the corner. And we always had a lot to talk about, coaching changes. Obviously, the women's basketball team making its run to the national championship game, which is still insane to think about, within the first year of starting this up. But to think about where, not just in terms of the podcast, but just where Arizona athletics was 3 years ago to now. And I mean, there's still problems, and it's not like there's, we don't have any more national championships to talk about, but we have a lot of good things to discuss. And it's been a fantastic few weeks, few months. And again, we'll enjoy it for as long as it lasts.
And that's the approach. Let's get right into something else that's good news. And that's Shane's standouts. There's a lot to choose from when Arizona drops 98 on Wisconsin, aren't there?
Well, certainly want to mention Pelle Larsson real quick, because his just all around game has improved this year. But I want to specifically mention Caleb Love, which is not a shock. But you look at the 2 games, the 3 big non-conference games Arizona's had this year. They narrowly defeated Duke and Michigan State. They blew out Wisconsin. What was the difference in? There's more than one difference in those games. But to me, the biggest one was Caleb Love's performance against Wisconsin. He collectively shot about 30 some odd % from the field against Duke and Michigan State combined. Against Wisconsin, 20 points on 7 of 13 shooting, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, just 1 turnover. Arizona only had 7 turnovers as a team. And he played outstanding defense. And that to me is the difference between, it's great they can find a way to win when he doesn't play especially well, but when he's on, that it tells you how dangerous this team can be. And they're going to need him against Purdue, which we'll talk about soon. And then I'll also mention on the women's side, the women's team is 7-2. Not a lot of impressive wins to speak of because they haven't played a lot of tough competition, but their star freshman, Brea Cunningham, is a double-double machine, 12 points, 10 rebounds, went 6 of 7 from the field in Arizona's 43-point win over San Diego on Thursday. Arizona's 7-2. They've got a lot of tough conference games coming up, unlike the men. So I want to give her a shout out as well. And we'll have a lot more standouts to talk about as other sports get going, but want to mention those 2 individuals.
Yeah, and we'll get more women's basketball talk in the new year. It's just been crazy. We're not used to talking about football in December,
Right? Yeah.
and now there's some big games ahead. Now, Shane and I are going to record a podcast after this one later next week after the Alabama game that you and I will both be at in Phoenix. So we'll recap that one, preview Florida Atlantic, talk about the bowl game and everything in between. And then we'll do one right afterwards, our kind of year-end show. Just some highlights, we'll go over the bowl game and then just kind of our favorite highlights of Arizona in 2023. But all right, let's get on to our usual segment one, and that is buy or sell, presented by our friends at Ice Shaker. Go to iceshaker.com, use promo code Wildcat Country, capital W, capital C, and get $5 off. And once you order your Ice Shaker, go do the post the post purchase survey.
Yes, very important.
And just mention Wildcat Country in there. And if you do, Shane and I will be very grateful. So
that helps let them know that we're moving some product for them. And by the way, if you have bought an Ice Shaker, in part because of us, thank you so much. But if you do buy one in the future, please mention that you heard about Ice Shaker on Wildcat Country, and that will continue to allow us to bring you the quality content we bring you every single week.
Or so we try. All right, number one in buy or sell. All right, Shane, we know, and I'm not trying to dog you here, but you are cynical, okay? You are cynical with your picks. Even you, after watching what Arizona men's basketball has done lately, your cynicism has to be, I guess, reduced, right?
It's not cynicism, it's strategy. Well, it's cynicism too. But yeah, okay. It's like if they lose, at least I'm right. But you know what? I'm calling this, Eric, how I learned to stop worrying and love the regular season. Okay. I tweeted after the Wisconsin game that Arizona is the number one team in the country, both in terms of being deserving of being the number one team and actually being the best team in the country, because they are right now. And I got mostly positive, but a handful of replies to the extent of, well, yeah, that's nice, but we've seen this before. Arizona has a great regular season and they disappoint in the tournament. And I get it. You're preaching to the choir. I completely get it. But, and I'm talking to myself as much as anyone else, it's still okay to enjoy the regular season. It's okay to enjoy winning at Cameron Indoor. It's okay to enjoy blowing out a team that we owed some payback to, like last weekend. And I know it can be frustrating to see this team playing so well in December, but Arizona can't win a national championship in December. All they can do right now is win the games in front of them. We can't 80s montage, singing "You're the best around" all the way from now until March. But yes, if we dare look ahead, this team, they check all the boxes, including those that they didn't check last year: rebounding, defense, toughness, great guard play. All those, all the criteria that I like to mention that Casey Jacobson, our friend, laid out as what you needed to have in a Final Four contender. Arizona checks all those boxes. This is the most well-rounded team that Tommy Lloyd's had in his short tenure. They're all his guys, which I think matters as well. And they're actually rated higher in Ken Palm on defense than offense. They're the only team rated in the top 5 in both categories. Their opponent, Purdue, is the only other team rated in the top 10 in both. So, yeah, they're an outstanding team. I buy that they're the best team in the country. The game against Wisconsin sold me. And on a personal level, I'm not thinking about March. I'm not thinking about Glendale or anything. Maybe you are, Eric. I'm not. I'm just enjoying it one game at a time, and I'm trying to keep it that way.
Tickets are really expensive, Shane. I haven't personally looked, but I had a friend who was looking, just to see if they're, what it would look like. Could always sell if Arizona wasn't there, and tickets are really expensive. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Tax refund.
Ish. Listen, it has been a lot of fun thus far. We have not talked about a football or men's basketball loss since early October. Do you
remember how long it took for us to talk about a football win?
Yeah, right.
Over a year.
Yeah.
And here we are, and they haven't lost since my birthday, which is when the football team destroyed Washington State. Since I've been 43, and yes, I am 43, the football team hasn't lost, and the men's basketball team hasn't lost either.
Unbelievable.
Amazing.
Enjoy the ride. All right. Number 2, Shane, this team just has a different feel to it than in previous seasons, even the really good ones under Sean Miller. Buy or sell?
On offense, I would say yes, for sure. And I even think back to the Aaron Gordon year where they probably should have gotten to the Final Four and maybe won the whole thing. They were a very questionable call away from getting there. But there were times even in that season when they wouldn't score for several possessions in a row. And this team just seems to score at will. They could have put up 100 against Wisconsin if they wanted to. And there was still the most points that Wisconsin has allowed in almost 30 years. So, yeah, I think this is the most I've used this term with a football team, but the most well-rounded Arizona team I've seen in a long time. And it's still early, and we're not even, or barely 25% of the way into the regular season, but they check all the boxes. They can score in bunches. They kind of remind me on the basketball side of Chip Kelly's Oregon team back in the day, like where they could, you could be ahead at halftime and then you blink and you're behind by 30 points in the third quarter. On the basketball side, you saw against Wisconsin, it was tied late in the first half. And then all of a sudden Wisconsin's thinking, what the hell just happened? We're down 17 at halftime. So that's something that Sean Miller's teams weren't often able to do. They had the defense and the toughness that maybe Tommy Lloyd's first two teams were lacking. And this year you have that defense and the toughness along with the offense. So I think that so far they've been more impressive than any single team Sean Miller had in that regard.
All right. So this team kind of reminds me of the TJ McConnell and Nick Johnson teams in that they aren't scared. The last few iterations of Arizona's teams, outside of Ben Matherin, a couple years ago, guys were hesitant to take a shot.
Yeah.
Matherin saved Arizona in 2022, in March of 2022, and got him to the Sweet 16 where they fell. But that was a team that was dead against TCU before they rallied. Last year, they had nobody. Once the game got tight, they were afraid. They almost seemed scared.
They didn't have that alpha like you've talked about.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Tubelis is a great player, but he wasn't your guy. He wasn't going to say, give me the ball. Let me do it. You have multiple guys now. Pelle Larson, Kylan Boswell, Caleb Love, Kishad Johnson, even Umar Ball. All five of those guys, not afraid.
I throw in Jaden Bradley as well. You haven't seen a lot of him. I guess Tommy Lloyd mentioned he's dealing with a turf toe injury, so hopefully the reduced schedule helps get him back to where he needs to be. Remember that shot he made against Michigan State, though? With the shot clock running down, it was nails. So
even KJ Lewis. KJ Lewis he doesn't play afraid. Yeah. That's the difference I see in this Arizona team as compared to previous years, and that's going to benefit them in the tournament. Now, sure, you never know what kind of matchup you're going to get there, and if you catch them on a bad night, but this team isn't going to be scared if they fall behind by 6 in the second half.
Yeah.
And it kind of leads into my next question. So we'll go there, Shane. We'll start here, and I kind of we'll expand on this. Arizona men's basketball team will finish the season with less losses, the regular season, with less losses than Arizona football. Buy or sell? And
I will credit my nephew, Zach, for coming up with this question,
because
I think it's a very, very good question. So you have to look at these next 3 games. We're halfway through that non-conference gauntlet. They got Purdue, Alabama, and FAU. If they win even two of those 3, are there 2 conference losses in there? And then I guess you also have to ask, is Arizona football going to win its bowl game? So that factors in the equation as well. So I will kind of hedge, and I will say it'll probably be about even, with 3 or 4 losses probably in there. And maybe look, they may not lose that many. They may not. I just feel like, there's going to be a pitfall here or there where they get caught off guard, or they get caught looking ahead, or there's an injury and hopefully nothing long term. But, it's very, very difficult to go undefeated in the regular season. Lute Olson's teams never did that even in conference play. So there's probably a couple losses in there, maybe as soon as this weekend. So I'll keep it simple. I will sell that they'll have fewer losses than the football team, but I think they'll have probably, at this point, I would guess they'll have around the same amount.
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty good bet here. I'd say probably 3, and we're not going to make our bowl picks. We'll make those on next week's show. I'd say 3 seems like a good number. This week against Purdue, we'll make our pick at the end, so we don't want to spoil that. But let me say this, and I just want to mention this early on. I know we all want to see Arizona win every game, but is it necessarily a good thing if Arizona enters March Madness as an undefeated team? You want to talk about cynicism from my co-host at times? Even if Arizona's undefeated, I will be even more on edge than Shane because the target is on your back. Yeah. If you have 1 or 2 losses, you've had a great year. But if you're undefeated like Gonzaga was the other year, and they didn't win it all, they got smoked in the championship game by Baylor.
Yeah, there's 2 schools of thought on this. You have the Mike Ditka perspective, who said that he said his Bears never would have won the Super Bowl if they hadn't lost that one game in the regular season and learned from
the Dolphins. Yep.
Yeah. I didn't remember who it was. That was good. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you have Charles Barkley said he'd never learned more from losing than he did from almost winning. It really doesn't matter. There's no value in losing. You can learn either way. So I think the younger the team, the better it is maybe to have a loss in there. Like sometimes I feel like it might be better to lose in the conference tournament just to have that chip on your shoulder going into the NCAA tournament. Maybe that's a crazy way of thinking about it, but you go back to the 97 team. I mean, I know they kind of came out of nowhere, but they lost their last 2 regular season games before they ran the table in the NCAA tournament. So is there value in losses? That's debatable. That's kind of like an age-old sports question.
I just am thinking about the target on your back with 0 losses.
Well,
and
I think if they're a 1 seed, they're going to have a target anyway. But I concede your point.
I don't think the Pac-12 looks very good. I mean, you tweeted something from the Wildcat, or I think you might have. It said there's no
other ranked teams
in the con. I mean, USC is not bad. Colorado's not bad. UCLA is okay.
Utah beat BYU. Washington beat Gonzaga.
I mean, so there's some decent teams. I think Arizona will lose 2 or 3 games. That makes sense. But we're not going to overreact to those. I think the key is you don't want to lose multiple games in a row, and you don't want to go on a road trip and get swept. Yeah. Then you go up to Utah, Colorado, for example, or wherever, and you lose both games in a weekend. Yeah, that's not good. Yeah. And I don't know the schedule offhand, so we'll have to look at that. That's what would concern me.
Yeah, it just comes down to timing.
Bounce back.
Yeah, it comes down to timing. I mean, it depends on when the loss is, and if the team is able to bounce back. Have they righted the ship before the tournament, or are they working on it in the middle of the tournament, which you don't want? And then, of course, injuries always factor into it as well. So it's just not something you can prepare for. Like if the NCAA tournament were a month earlier or a month later every year, you probably have a different champion almost every time. So it's just the nature of the NCAA tournament. It's a very cutthroat competition in that regard.
Before we bring on Brian Jeffries, one more topic, and we'll ask him about this as well. Let's talk about football for a second. That nothing can happen. I mean, nothing in the Alamo Bowl that will dampen what has been an amazing 2023 football season. Would you buy or sell that notion?
As much as I don't want to, I will sell it because I got to tell you, I think back to that 09 game, the Holiday Bowl in 09, after Arizona finished second in the Pac-10, and everyone was feeling great about the season, and then they go and they get dismantled by Nebraska. Like they couldn't do anything right in that game. Like, I don't know. They must have had like 50 yards of total offense in that game. Everything went wrong. Bad. They got shut out. It was terrible. And then in 14, I mean, they got decimated by Oregon. They had a decent showing, but lost in the Fiesta Bowl to Boise State. I don't really think that put a damper on that season. But I think more back to the 09 team. And this is, for better or worse, going to be their last game for a few months, and you want to have a good showing. If they lose a close game to a good Oklahoma team, with or without Dylan Gabriel, I don't think there's any shame in that, because it's going to be probably more or less a road game for them anyway. And Oklahoma's still a very good team. So I don't think anyone's going to think any less of Arizona, or I don't think the team is going to hang its head collectively if they lose a close game. If they put a very poor performance out there and lose by 3 or 4 scores, and I think that could be something that gets into the players' heads a little bit and maybe puts a bit of a damper into the offseason going into the next season. So I will sell that nothing can happen, because I think if Arizona loses, gets shut out again like they did in the Holiday Bowl in 09, we'd feel pretty crappy about that. But they lost a close game, I think we'd feel okay.
That is a really good take, and I'm going to agree with everything you just said. It's not, I mean, I have a hard time seeing it, especially against an Oklahoma defense that's not very good, that Arizona laying an egg. Yeah, their defense might not play well, and Oklahoma may run up 40-something on them, but I think Arizona is going to score points with Noah Fafita and T-Mac. I think outside of injuries or just a complete catastrophic failure like that Holiday Bowl, there's no result within reasonable thought at this point that would make me enjoy what we saw this season less. What Arizona did after their bye week in winning those last 5 games was the most glorious stretch of Arizona football that I can remember as a season ticket holder in the last nearly 2 decades, more than 2 decades. It was phenomenal. So barring a catastrophic meltdown of, and of failures that we can't even imagine, God, this has been fun. And nothing will take away from how I felt standing in that pouring rain against Utah in one of the last weekends in November, and loving every second of it.
And I want people to know Eric never ran for cover. I did at the end of the first half. Eric stood there and got drenched and
twice.
And so He is a true fan, and I know you've been at every game except for the pandemic season and and the Cal game because she had COVID.
Yep.
But you've been other
That's
than
right.
that, you've been to every game, every home game, and for the last
Since 2007. Yep.
yeah. So
it's
of course
been
you
a good
stuck
run.
it out in the rain. Yeah, and I'm glad you're getting rewarded for your loyalty.
You know what, Shane? I just wanted to soak it up. No pun intended.
Yeah.
Coming up next, the voice of the Wildcats, Brian Jeffries, here on Wildcat Country.
What's up, everyone? It's Chris Gronkowski, and football season is back. Ice Shaker is a proud sponsor of the Wildcat Country podcast. Don't forget to check out some of our new products like the Ice Shaker with the built-in bump box speaker that's going to absolutely pop at your next tailgate party. Let's crush it this season. Bear down!
Shane, what an absolute treat to have the voice of the Wildcats, the legend, Brian Jeffries, join us once again here on Wildcat Country. Brian, the last time we spoke with you was right before you were heading to Boulder, and Arizona was going to play Duke. The Wildcats were what, 1-0 in basketball, and I think they were, what would that be, 6-3 in football? And since then, well, I don't think you've called a loss. Just kind of explain what the last, 6-7 weeks have been like for you, and just the excitement just to be a part of all of it.
Well, let's start with football, guys. And, it was an outstanding season. It's not over yet. And, Jed Fish didn't get Coach of the Year in the Pac-12, but he must have been a close second runner-up because he just did a phenomenal job. And he and his staff, I think, just did a great job. They took a team that, people didn't really know what to expect. I think a lot of us were hoping, hey, if they could win 6 games and get to a bowl, that would be a great step up. And Jed thought back in August that, they had a chance to be good. He didn't know how good. And it goes back to that loss at USC. And he talks about it all the time, that kind of got things rolling for them. And so since then, they haven't been beaten. They played really good football. I think that's probably the closest thing they had come to a loss at that point. And you kind of expected a letdown there. And they didn't play very well in the first half, got to turn around in the second half, won the game, and went on from there. So they're in great shape going to the Alamo Bowl against Oklahoma. I think everybody's excited about it. Have a chance to win 10 games, which hasn't happened very often in this program. And so nothing but good things right now. They haven't had any major names in the transfer portal yet. I guess that's what everybody's watching for right now. And they'll be headed here to San Antonio pretty soon. So I think that if even if they don't win that game, they've had an outstanding season. They've got a lot to build on. If they win it, it puts them in great shape going to the Big 12 next year.
And along the point of them having a chance to win a 10th game, I think Jed Fish mentioned at the Alamo Bowl press conference that Oklahoma has won 10 games in like 18 of their last 21 seasons or something like that. And Arizona's won 10 games 3 times ever. So he noted the disparity between the programs and the chance to sort of catch up. Let me ask you, Brian, because Eric and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, comparing this year's team to the last couple of very good Arizona teams, the 2014 team that won 10 games, the 2009 team that finished second in the Pac-10. How do you think this team compares to those two teams in particular? And do you think this team has a chance to finish out the season on a higher note than those two teams did, considering what happened in the postseason?
Yeah. 2014, this is a much better defensive team than the 14 team by far. The 14 team had some key guys on offense, and they could score, but they had to outscore their opponents. That's the way they won their games. And so the previous team, 09 team you mentioned, I think a little more balanced. This team top to bottom to me, I tell you what, it's hard to, not go back to 98 or, and some of those Desert Swarm teams, the defense isn't quite that good, but it has some of the same makings to it. And offensively, this team, I think, is farther ahead than, maybe that 12-1 team is about as close as you could come. And I think actually this team might even, and no offense to some of those guys, have a better quarterback than either of those teams that you mentioned.
Let's look ahead to the Oklahoma game, and it looks like the Sooners are, they've all but announced that Dylan Gabriel is not going to play. He's already announced a transfer to Oregon. And they're going to miss some other key players as well. How do you think Arizona matches up with the Sooners? The two very high-powered offenses, Oklahoma and Arizona combined for 128 points in their last game. How do you see the game shaking out?
Well, at least on paper, I think Oklahoma's got a better offense. They're averaging about 45 points a game this year, giving up 22. Arizona's defensive numbers are almost identical. Offensively, again, not quite there. But without Gabriel, that changes a lot of things for Oklahoma. And he was really the key to that. I mean, they had an outstanding, very deep receiving core. They've got good running backs. I wouldn't say they're great, and who all's going to play and not play. I think that's going to be a big question from them. As of right now, Arizona's only missing one starter, and that's Jordan Morgan, their left tackle, who's going to sit out because he's getting ready for the NFL draft. And I think everybody understands that coming off the ACL injury. So I think without Gabriel, this makes it a much more even match. I think if he was on the field in uniform, I think Oklahoma would have an edge offensively. It would put a lot of pressure on Arizona's defense, but now you don't know. I mean, their second string quarterback hasn't played a whole lot this year. So I think it gives the Wildcats a great opportunity. And again, everything being equal, and we'll still have to find out here, I guess, in the next couple of weeks, who's in and who's out. But so far, Jordan's the only Arizona player that said he's not going to participate. Where, like you said, I think Oklahoma's got a number of guys that either are going to sit out or are in the portal, as Dylan Gabriel is, or was, or wherever he is right now.
Yeah, I would be shocked. Gabriel's gone. I mean, he's not in the program. This is Jackson Arnold time. Guy's a 5-star. Oklahoma's talking about him as the future. So I guess it'll be interesting to see how he debuts against Arizona. All right, Brian, the last time we had you on, we were talking about, the joy of calling these games, stuff like that. I said to Shane the other week, in attending the Utah, and Shane and I were both at the Utah game and then the ASU game. I mean, those were two of the greatest weeks consecutively of Arizona football that I can remember in terms of just pure joy. This was a team that dominated two football teams, albeit Utah was ranked and ASU was not that good, but the absolute sheer domination. Can you remember, just offhand, a stretch of two games against, two important football games where Arizona has looked so good consecutively?
Well, you have to go back to that 12-1 team. That's probably the last time that I remember. I mean, they've had some other runs where they've been able to win a couple of games back-to-back against good teams. But, yeah, to do it in that fashion, I mean, Utah's kind of the standard in the Pac-12. And, when Jed Fish got to Arizona, he said, look, Utah's the team that we look up at, that we want to get to that point someday. And a lot of people asked after the ballgame, do you feel like maybe you've reached that level? And he said, well, we can play with them, we can beat them, but now the next thing is the consistency. And that's what Utah's done for a long time, where Arizona's just getting started trying to be consistent like that. Beating Utah, you could see it in the players' faces, I think, throughout that week leading up to the game. They knew what kind of opportunity they had. Not only was it, senior day, last home game, etc. It was against a team that they look at as, the team that has kind of ruled the South when we did have the North and South in the Pac-12, and the team that they wanted to be like, the team they really wanted to beat. And so they played extremely well. And going up to ASU, I mean, that's always a scary game. I mean, I don't care. You can reverse the records, whatever you want to say. You guys know that. It's a rivalry game. Anything could happen. And so, yeah, I was scared. Maybe that's not the right word. Nervous going in, thinking, okay, Arizona should win this game. They're the better team. There's no doubt about it. ASU goes 75 yards on that opening drive. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. I mean, this is what the rivalry is all about. And that was it, in terms of really what ASU did offensively. And, Arizona just played really, I thought Noah Fafita, probably had his best game just in terms of the way he ran the team. He had the one bad pass. Other than that, he just had a great day. Michael Wiley was tremendous. It was two games that, they played like a very confident football team. And if they can carry that attitude to San Antonio here in a couple of weeks, they can beat Oklahoma. Even if they had Dylan Gabriel, I'd say Arizona could beat Oklahoma if they can play with that type of confidence.
In our wildest dreams before the season, we had a few people that were saying and comments on some of our YouTubes, 9-3. And Shane and I were like, these people are nuts. In our wildest dreams, we would never have expected that. Now, also, let's segue to basketball here. Shane and I would talk before the season. We're like, well, maybe Arizona will get to number one at some point. And here we are. And this team, to me, has looked as dominant in the early season as any Arizona team in recent memory. Would you say, in your opinion, the dominance thus far that we've seen, the win at Duke, the comeback, and the game against Michigan State and then what we saw against Wisconsin on Saturday has been as impressive as any recent Wildcat team in your memory?
Absolutely. And I think that's, a lot of that has to do with what Tommy Lloyd's been able to build. And even on his radio show this week, he admitted, he said, look, I'm in my third year now. I'm just starting to feel comfortable in this job. He said, my head was spinning the first year. And even the second year, he admitted that he was still growing into it because keep in mind, he'd never been a head coach before. And so he feels a lot more comfortable and his system is in place. And he's got all the players that he wants in the program that he's been able to bring in, and they fit what he wants to do. They want to play what he wants to play. And so I just think that he feels very good about where they are right now. As any coach will say, there's always things to fix and always things they're working on. And the way the schedule's kind of panned out this year, we've had these last 3 weeks where it's been Saturday, Saturday, Saturday. And so they've had a lot of time to prepare for their next opponent and work on some of those little things in practice. But, really, the transfer portal has helped. And then I think the freshman, KJ Lewis, has been very impressive. Mo Krivas, to me, has maybe been the most impressive. A 7'2" freshman kid that hasn't been in the States more than a couple of months, has played like he's been here for a couple of years. And so those two guys in particular, I think, have made a huge difference. And, when you get, you get some good transfers in there, Caleb Love, needless to say, Kylan Boswell made a huge jump, which you expected. He was 17 last year as a freshman, and he's changed his bodies, his shot. He worked a lot on his 3-point shot. You can see how well that's going down right now. And Keyshawn Johnson, one of the other transfers, has been a real key for them at both ends of the court. So they've got all the tools right now. They've got better depth than they did a year ago. Tommy's stayed with an 8-man rotation, and I think they're kind of hoping maybe that 9th man emerges here. We'll find out in the next couple of weeks. But, they're well equipped right now, and they're prepared to play anybody, and they've shown it so far. Now, Wisconsin, as Tommy said, that's going to be our toughest game of the year. Well, guess what? Now it's toughest game part 2 against the preseason number 1 and arguably the best player in college basketball.
Yeah, Brian, you sort of alluded to this, but I was thinking, was watching Arizona the last several games that, maybe everything's clicking now. I mean, Tommy Lloyd did great the first 2 years as well, but everything's clicking a little bit more now, maybe because every guy on that roster came to play specifically for Tommy Lloyd. Some of Sean Miller's guys stuck around, which is great, Matherin and Tubelis and Krisa, but everyone here playing for Arizona now came to play for Tommy Lloyd. Do you think that makes a difference this year?
Well, I think it does. Now, I think I go back to last year, actually 2 years ago, talking to Kirk Krisa before the season started, how much he loved Tommy Lloyd's style of coaching and style of play. And things didn't work out for him, and so be it. Azuolas Tubelis, I think, adapted very well. But no, I agree that anytime you get your own recruits in the program, there's something to be said there. And that's one reason I think they're playing at a little higher level right now. Well, I'll go back to last year. Arizona won the Maui Invitational last year. I mean, they played 3 great games, and they kind of leveled off after that for a while. And a lot of us never felt that they didn't. It's not that they dropped in their level of play. They didn't improve as much as the season went on. And they did fine in Las Vegas in the Pac-12 tournament, but you lose that first round game to Princeton, and it kind of came back to haunt them, I think, at that point. And Tommy wanted to make some changes, and personnel-wise made some changes. And also, again, he's looking for more depth. That's one thing that he admitted last year, that they didn't use their bench the way they should have or could have. And you saw that in that Princeton game. You guys were tired at that point of the season. And that's why I think he would love to see that 9th man emerge here and give those top 5 guys some extra rest. And they've had some excellent play off the bench. I mentioned Mo Krivas and Jaden Bradley. The transfer from Alabama has helped a lot. So they need to find that one more guy now, I think, that could help them out. And they've got a couple candidates there.
I'm test your memory again, Brian. This number 1 Arizona versus number 3 Purdue. How many non-conference matchups can you remember that were as big as this one? Not in terms of the rankings, but in terms of the hype going into it.
Well, there's been a couple of Arizona Duke games in the past. The previous time Arizona went to Cameron, I remember playing Duke at the Meadowlands. That was Sean Elliott against who was that played for Duke? Well, anyway, that was a great game. Won a lot of Arizona and Kansas was big. Salim Stoudemire kind of put an end to that. Had a huge game in the second half back at Fog Allen. That's one game that stands out. Any Arizona UCLA game, you could pick probably a number of years when both of them had been, probably in the top 10 and faced off. We've seen UConn come to town here when they were pretty good under Jim Calhoun. I remember that was a big game. Lute Olson used to have the Fiesta Bowl Classic, which was a 2-game, 4-team tournament right before Christmas every year. And if you go back and look at the teams that came in and played in that, and included Duke,
right,
those were always, massive games, just in terms of the hype that went into it. And it doesn't happen anymore. I mean, teams don't want to travel and go into environments like that anymore, so you don't see it. It comes down now really to these, like this week, these made-for-TV games that a promoter puts together on a neutral site. And we're going to see it next week, Arizona and Alabama up in Phoenix. It's the same thing, and Arizona and Florida Atlantic in Las Vegas right after that. That's really the only way now you really get these games. Now, it was great, that Tommy they've got a home and home with Duke. They've got a home and home with Wisconsin. And so I think those things, Tommy has some good connections. And and he's not afraid to play anybody. That's the other part of it. He'll travel, and they travel to Duke. Next year, they'll go to Wisconsin. He's fine with that. So I think that will bring about more of those big matchups down the road.
And Eric definitely isn't hyperventilating about the non-conference schedule anymore. Last question for you, Brian. And like Eric said, we always appreciate your time. Just give us a preview of this game. I mean, obviously Purdue's got probably the National Player of the Year, Zach Edey, but they've also got some shooters. They're the only two teams, Arizona and Purdue, in both the top 10 in adjusted offense and adjusted defense in Ken Palm. I don't ask you to make a prediction, obviously, but what are some of the keys to the game?
Well, I mean, it's going to start and end with Zach Edey. How do you defend him? He's 7'4", 300 pounds. He gets to the free throw line almost 12 times a game. Nobody else does that. And he makes his free throws. He hit 11 of 11 in their last game against Alabama.
You can't hack a Shaq him.
You cannot hack a Shaq him. You cannot. And so how do you defend him? Do you double team him? Well, if you do that, Purdue is very good. There's a reason they were number one in the preseason poll. They brought back their starting lineup from last year. They got other guys that can score for you. In fact, they've got a great inside-outside game. So if you can defend Edey, somehow defend him, they've got guys who can hit threes. Very good shooters from the outside. So you really can't pick your poison. You can't defend one and give up the other, because they'll burn you, and that's why Purdue's really good. I mean, their loss was at Northwestern in overtime. That's a really tough place to play. It was a conference game. I get it. But you take a look at who they've beaten this year. They won Maui this year. And so they've beaten Marquette. They've beaten Gonzaga. I mean, they're for real. They could win the national championship this year. It wouldn't surprise anybody. So I think Tommy's going to play him straight up. I don't think you really have any choice. And keep in mind, Arizona's got some big guys too. And, Umar Ball is coming off his best game of the season. I mentioned Mo Krivas at 7'2", confident freshman, and he's going to get plenty of time in there. So if Arizona can at least neutralize Edey and not let him take over the game, then I think the Wildcats have got a great chance to go in there and win. And they're not going to be afraid. It's quote unquote a neutral court in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Well, we know that's not the case. But they've won at Cameron. I think that game in Palm Springs, even though it was a 50-50 crowd, they love that environment. And so that's not going to be a factor. It's going to be Arizona executing and defending without fouling, Edey in particular.
Last question here, Brian. I always like to ask you about memories, but this is a little bit of a different one. As somebody who's a historian, I love of like old NFL games and the Packers. That's my team. And Ray Scott was the voice of the Packers during the Lombardi years. He also happened to be kind of a mentor for you and was the last person to call Arizona games full time before you did. What kind of influence did he have on you? And is there anything in your broadcasting style that you got from Ray Scott?
I got everything from him, Eric. I really did. I mean, I had been here about 5 years Ray had semi-retired to Tucson, but nobody knew it. And Arizona had gone through, I think, 3 play-by-play guys in about 5 years or something like that. And somehow the general manager of our radio station that I worked at the time found out that Ray Scott was retired in Tucson, and went to talk to him and kind of talked him into it. And it made it very easy for him. It was football, basketball only. He didn't have to do the coach's show. Didn't have to lug any equipment around. And, that was it. He didn't have to come into the office every day, just call the games. And so the 2 years I spent with Ray, if not for that, I wouldn't be sitting here today. I mean, he taught me everything. Probably the biggest thing he taught me was I was doing a lot of high school sports at that time, and I'd done U of A baseball at that time. And he talked to me on a weekly basis. We sat down because we would travel together. So we had dinner all the time and talked. And I said to him at one point, I said, Ray, I just don't know if I'm going to be able to make it in this business, because when I go back and listen to my tapes, I make mistakes. And he looked at me, and you've got to understand, Ray, I got to know him really well, but he could come off as kind of a gruff individual if you didn't know him. And he just stared at me for a couple of seconds. And then in his voice, which was one of those voices from God, he said, Brian, I've been in this business now for 55 years, and I have never, ever called a perfect game. And what he meant by that is that everybody makes mistakes. And, you can't go through a game without making some kind of mistake. It just happens. And so that totally turned me around. At that point, I thought, okay, so it's okay. Doesn't mean you don't, you want to make, you want to try and get perfection, but chances of it are slim to none. And so that was probably the greatest piece of advice he ever gave me. Just being around him, knowing that being simple and stupid sometimes is better than being fancy. And he wasn't a guy that liked catchphrases. He says, you've got to remember where your audience is. You've got to remember that your audience, probably doesn't know everything about football or basketball. And so you need to talk to them and not pretend like you know everything, because you're going to insult people that way. And so, and he knew everybody in the business. I mean, I met all kinds of people. One of my favorite stories is that we were having lunch in Las Vegas. We're going to play UNLV in Las Vegas, and we were at a restaurant eating lunch before the day of the game. And I was kind of looking around, and I saw a guy over at this table, and I said, Ray, that guy looks just like Reggie Jackson. And Ray goes, hey, Reg, come on over. Well, it was Reggie and his mom, and we ended up having lunch with them. And wow, that was Ray. I mean, he knew everybody. Yeah. And so I had that honor and blessing to be able to meet people I never would have. And so it was the career-wise, like I said, he was everything to me. And I still think one of the all-time greatest. And I urge, when I talk to students, I say, go back and find tapes and listen to Ray Scott broadcasts, because he did it all. He did network television, he did radio. He told me stories about Vince Lombardi that, I could write a book about. So, tremendous man.
Really cool stories and great insight as always from you, Brian. Happy holidays, happy new year. We'll be listening to you on the way, and I'm sure we'll talk to you early in 2024 as the teams continue to progress. Thanks so much for coming on with Shane and I.
Anytime, guys. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.
Shane, that was a lot of fun talking to Brian Jeffries, and I just wanted to ask him about Ray Scott. If you've ever watched on ESPN, like when they do the Ice Bowl, and they do like play-by-play of the Ice Bowl, and they show you every play, the voice you hear in Green Bay as the ball is Ray Scott's. And Brian's imitation of him was spot on, and those stories I thought were really cool.
I had no idea.
Arizona.
Yeah, I had no idea. Well, you're a Packers fan, so you would know that. But yeah, I had no clue. I had no idea that he learned. It makes sense because Brian's fantastic, and he would have learned from the best. But cool story. Even though Reggie Jackson's an ASU guy, it was and great insight on the football and men's basketball teams as always from Brian.
All right, so we're going to make a few picks on some bowl games, and then we'll get to basketball before it goes down here. But let's start with the New Orleans Bowl. Well, first of all, let's give some records. Usually we've had a guest picker this year, but the guests have not done well, Shane. I mean, they're 15 games under 500.
So we're not inviting anyone until next week.
Yeah. Until next week. I am 19 games above 500. You are 11. Ugh. So excuse me, you're 9. So I have a 5-game lead on you. I have 70, 51.
Sounds like I'm about to owe you lunch, huh? I got a chance to catch up though.
We got a lot of games we're gonna pick.
All right,
and then we'll do a separate one for basketball as well, and I'll tabulate that. But all right, start with the New Orleans Bowl, and you're like, what in the heck are you thinking? We got Louisiana against Rich Rod's Jacksonville State team, who is favored by 3 points in the Superdome. Now I'll start with this one, Shane. Jacksonville State had a great year. They were not bowl eligible, but there weren't enough teams that fit the bill, so they were able to get a waiver to get in. I'm going with Jacksonville State to cover this one. Rich Rod tops off a really good first year in FBS competition with this one.
Did you see the video that of Rich Rod telling his guys on the plane? It was like, because I guess they lost their last game, and he said, I was pissed watching that film. I know you guys were pissed, so guess what? We're not ending the season like that. And so that was fun.
That's awesome. I didn't see that. No, that's awesome.
No, that was good. He said, I know you all don't want to end the season like that. And guess what? We're not going to, because we're going to a bowl game. So that was cool. That was classic Rich Rod. But yeah, getting Rich Rod, Jacksonville State, they're probably the more excited team to be there. They didn't know they're going to have another chance to play this year. And I like them to cover and win their 9th game of the season. And then it could be interesting. Maybe Rich Rodriguez will get another big name job before it's all said and done, or maybe he likes Jacksonville. I don't know.
Wait for West Virginia to open up maybe next year.
West Virginia maybe.
Pretty good year under Neil Brown. All right, the LA Bowl hosted by Gronk. Boise State, who won the Mountain West, is playing UCLA, who is a 2.5-point favorite. Shane, I'll let you start with this one. Can UCLA bounce back after a disastrous final game against Cal?
Oh, it's hard to know what to make of them, isn't it? After they lose to ASU, and they blow out USC, and then they get blown out by Cal. I think the question for this game is the classic, who's more excited to be there. Mm-hmm. And while neither team is likely super excited, I'll take Boise State because I think they're going to be a bit more invested in the outcome. So I'll take Boise State to win outright.
All right. So here's the problem with these bowl games now. You just don't know who's going to play. Boise State's starting quarterback is in the portal. They might be down to a true freshman, I believe it is.
Who's starting quarterback isn't in the portal, though?
Arizona.
Yeah.
And UCLA has Garbers that's still there. And for that reason, I'm going to pick UCLA because they actually have a quarterback who's played before. And I think they want to bounce back. Chip Kelly, they weren't sure about his job certainty. He's staying, has a little bit of job security now, at least for another year. So I'm going with UCLA in LA. It's kind of a home game for them, but I think they take care of business and get it done against a Boise State team that peaked the last 3 weeks of the year with an interim coach that's now full-time. But I don't think he gets it done in that bowl game. And then one last bowl game we'll talk about before we move on to basketball, the Independence Bowl. Cal, who won their last 3 games to get to 6-6, is playing Texas Tech, a team that I really liked at the start of the year. The Red Raiders are favored by 3 points. Future Arizona opponent, Shane. Which one do you like in that one?
I'm going to take another underdog and go with Cal. They played well toward the end of the season. They're bottom half of the conference, but they put it on UCLA. I think they're more excited to be in this game. Texas Tech, not so much. So give me Cal to win outright.
Yeah, I'm going to go with you there too, Shane. I just did not see that Texas Tech game against Texas where I think they lost by like 50.
Yeah, that was ugly.
And that was ugly. I thought Texas Tech would have a big year. They did not get off to a good start. Thought they would beat Oregon in week 2. Whoops. That did not happen. So you know what? I'm going to go with Cal. Have a nice upset. Justin Wilcox built some momentum and then off to the ACC, which is just weird to say. But so we're in agreement with 2 out of 3 of those bowl games. But will we be in agreement with a couple of Arizona basketball games that are going to happen? No, we're going to break down the first one. The second one, it's tough because you need to see what would happen in the first one, but we're still going to make a pick about that one. Give me some analysis on the Purdue game and then a pick.
Well, for those who haven't seen much of Purdue this season, you probably know the name Zach Edey, but they're talented well beyond him. They got a lot of shooters. They have 7 guys on this team who average over 10 minutes a game and shoot over 35% from 3. So it'll be interesting to see if the combination of Ballo and Krivas can combine to contain Edey. But even if they don't, he could go off for 40, and it probably wouldn't matter if Arizona can limit the rest of the team to under, say, 40% shooting from the field, which they're more than capable of doing. They're going to need another great game from Caleb Love. especially in what's essentially going to be a road game. They aren't going to be able to skate by without him playing great like they did against Duke or Michigan State. I'd go either way on this one. I'd probably pick Arizona if it was a neutral site game, but I'm going to lean Purdue to win by a bucket just because it's going to be right in their backyard, and Purdue really is that good too.
The thing about Purdue, Shane, that's good analysis. As far as I'm concerned with them, you should know one thing by now. Do not pick them to go far in March Madness, because if so, you will be disappointed every single year. Now,
same can go for another team we know.
Well, Purdue lost to a 16, which is worse than with the National Player of the Year. Arizona did not have anyone as talented as Zach Edey. I think Edey feasts on Saturday. And as we talked about earlier in the show, I think Arizona, in a way, needs to lose. Nobody thought they were going undefeated in conference, reasonably thought they were going undefeated in conference play. They should win their next 2 games, but this is a game where Purdue is essentially playing a home game. In March, I'm picking Arizona. In December, I'm picking Purdue by 5. If I'm wrong, I hope I'm wrong. But that's a pick. Yeah.
Eric, look at it this way: we could have a home and home with Arizona and Purdue this season. They play in Indianapolis and then maybe play later in the year in Glendale. It's entirely possible.
I would pick Arizona 100 times out of 100 if they played in the tournament, as long as everybody's healthy.
I'll save that soundbite in case it's relevant in a couple months.
It will be relevant. Now, next Wednesday, you and I will be at the Alabama-Arizona game. So I'm picking Arizona by double digits in that game. If they were to lose to Purdue, I think they bounce back. And Alabama's a good team, but I think Arizona puts it on them pretty good. So I'll say Arizona by double digits as a bounce back effort. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'll agree. I think Arizona wins by somewhere between 10 and 15 points, assuming, part of it's going to be a response to the Purdue game, and hopefully everyone's healthy coming out of that game. But all those things in line, I think Arizona wins, but it'll essentially be a home game for them by 10 or 15 points.
So it's going to be an interesting couple game stretch. Shane and I will break it down after the Alabama game. We'll give you our thoughts after seeing this team in person, what we expect as far, going forward with the Florida Atlantic game next Saturday. And then we'll break down the Alamo Bowl. It's a game right now that I am 11-1 against the spread in picking Arizona games this year. The only one I was wrong about was Washington State, where I thought they would lose, and they won by 38. Whoops. I don't have a strong feeling on the game as of right now, so I'm hoping one comes to me in the next week. I'm sure you have an inclination, but we'll save that for our next show.
I really don't know. I'm actually with you, Eric. I really don't know either. Bowl games are unpredictable as it is, because you just don't. They haven't faced similar competition. They played all completely different schedules, and then you have the injuries and the opt-outs to consider as well. So I don't really either. I think, and hopefully as we get a little bit closer, we'll have a better idea of who's playing. Hopefully Jordan Morgan is the only guy who sits out for Arizona. On the Oklahoma side, Dylan Gabriel sounds like he's out the door already. They'll probably have at least a couple more opt-outs, guys who declared for the draft already. So you factor that all in, and then the fact it's in Texas. I actually don't know what I'm going to pick. Genuinely don't know what I'm going to predict for that game yet. But hopefully something like inspiration will strike in about a week or so.
Normally on the Sunday or Monday after the previous week's game, I'll kind of have a feeling, and I really felt strongly about Oregon State, UCLA, and Utah. I'm like, Arizona's going to win these games, and I felt pretty good about that one. But I also felt strongly that Washington State would beat them pretty good coming off that UCLA game.
And I'll let people know that you're spot on with the ASU game too. I actually texted, just so people know, I texted Eric during the week. It's like, I'm nervous about this game because we should beat them. And you put my mind at ease and said, relax, they're going to take care of business. And they absolutely did.
Well, Brian said that too, Shane. Brian said after the ASU goes down at 7-3, I think everybody's like, here we go.
Yep.
And but this Wildcat team's different. And we talk about the basketball team having a different mentality. This football team does too. They don't get rattled. Yeah. They didn't get rattled against Washington either.
Well, they fell behind several times during that win streak against Washington State. Scored first in that game. I think Oregon State scored first. Colorado was ahead almost the entire game, and ASU was ahead in the first quarter, and none of that mattered. So that is one good thing to remember. If Arizona falls behind against Oklahoma, it's not the end of the world, because they do have that confidence built in.
I want to thank Brian Jeffries for joining us once again. Always great to catch up with him. For Shane Dale, I'm Eric Cohen. Thanks for listening, and as always, bear down.